So imagine going to the doctor with a, a really painful, highly disruptive issue that just keeps coming back.
Oh, that is the worst.
Right. You wait weeks for the appointment, you finally get into the exam room, and the treatment they casually hand you is the exact biological trigger that ensures your infection is going to come roaring back next month.
It's a nightmare scenario.
And for millions of women dealing with vaginal health issues, that isn't some dystopian hypothetical. It is literally the accepted standard of care.
It really is. It's this cycle of, well, institutional gaslighting, honestly.
Totally.
You present a complex recurring symptom, and you're met with, a polite nod, a quick glance at a chart, a generic prescription, and a hand already turning the doorknob to leave.
Which is actually the perfect jumping off point for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are unpacking source material today from a platform called BV Talks.
Right, which is an educational hub associated with the broader hashtag AskEvi initiative.
Exactly. We're looking at their ebooks, blogs, their interactive guides. But I want to be really clear right up front for you listening. Even if you don't have a vagina, do not tune out.
No, absolutely not. Because while the subject matter is, hyper-focused on vaginal symptoms, the platform itself is really a masterclass in dismantling medical gaslighting.
It's fascinating.
It's a literal blueprint for how to communicate deeply stigmatized, complex scientific info to any patient who has ever felt abandoned by the traditional medical system.
Yeah, we are going to explore how they're basically taking the shame out of the equation entirely and replacing it with raw science, humor, and just plain education.
And zero fluff.
Zero fluff. And to match the tone of our source material today, we are, leaving the euphemisms at the door. We're going to be straightforward and scientific.
I love it. Let's do it.
So let's look at the why behind this platform's existence. The text we are analyzing states explicitly that this space is built for women who are, quote, done being dismissed, misdiagnosed, or told to just use another round of antibiotics.
That phrase, done being dismissed, it carries so much weight.
It really does.
It validates this very specific psychological exhaustion. But the second half of that quote is where the actual biological problem lies,
Yeah.
The over-reliance on antibiotics for recurring issues.
Okay, wait. I need to stop you there and admit some confusion on my part.
Sure.
Because if a patient has a bacterial infection, antibiotics kill bacteria. That is what they are designed to do.
Right, that's the standard logic.
So why is handing a patient an antibiotic the very thing this platform is rallying against? It feels completely counterintuitive that the cure would be the problem.
Well, it feels counterintuitive until you look at the actual mechanism of the vaginal microbiome.
Yeah.
Because the traditional 15-minute clinical encounter is built for acute, isolated problems. Like you have strep throat, you take a targeted antibiotic, the bacteria dies, problem solved.
Right, one and done.
Exactly. But the vagina is not an isolated, sterile environment. It is a highly active, incredibly delicate ecosystem.
Like a rainforest or something.
Basically, yeah. And a healthy vaginal microbiome is dominated by good bacteria, specifically lactobacilli.
Okay, so these lactobacilli are essentially like the bouncers at the club.
They are the bouncers, the security system, and the maintenance crew, all rolled into one.
Wow, okay.
Because lactobacilli produce lactic acid and hydrogen peroxide, and this keeps the vaginal environment highly acidic, usually a pH between 3.8 and 4.5.
That's pretty low.
It is. And that acidic environment is incredibly hostile to bad invasive bacteria. It literally burns them out before they can multiply.
Okay, so what happens when a doctor just blindly prescribes a broad-spectrum antibiotic for an infection then?
Well, think of that microbiome like a lush, carefully cultivated garden.
Right.
A broad-spectrum antibiotic is the equivalent of pouring industrial bleach over the entire plot of land.
Oh, wow. That's a vivid image.
Yeah. Yes, you kill the invasive weeds that were causing the immediate infection, but you also completely annihilate the rich protective topsoil. You kill off all the lactobacilli.
Leaving the environment totally defenseless.
Completely. The pH level skyrockets because the acid-producing bacteria are dead.
Right.
And when the flora starts to grow back, the invasive, harmful bacteria, which are often much hardier and faster growing, they just take over the garden long before the protective lactobacilli can reestablish themselves.
That is wild.
So the treatment for the infection literally sets the biological stage for the next infection.
That makes the platform's frustration so much clearer. It's like living in a house where the power keeps going out in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah, good analogy.
You call an electrician, They walk down to your basement, flip the circuit breaker back on, and say, there you go, all
Yeah.
fixed.
Without actually checking anything.
Right. They never bother to check if the refrigerator wiring is frayed or the toaster is short-circuiting. They just reset the breaker.
Yep.
And of course, the next day, you plug in the toaster and bam, the power goes out again. Telling a patient to just use another round of antibiotics for a recurring infection is the medical equivalent of just flipping the breaker.
That's exactly it. It treats the immediate symptom, but completely ignores the underlying system failure.
Which is so frustrating for the patient.
Oh, incredibly. And by calling out that specific phrase in their literature, BV Talks is positioning itself as a direct response to that institutional failure.
Right.
They are acknowledging that the standard medical algorithm is actively harming these patients.
And if the standard algorithm is vague dismissals and temporary fixes, BV Talks counters it with, well, our next major takeaway from the sources, which is this hypergranularity.
Yes, the sheer power of specific, unapologetic data.
Exactly. The site features a guide titled BV versus yeast versus Trich, the quick difference guide.
A lifesaver for so many people.
But before we look at how they communicate this to the user, we need to actually unpack what these three things are. Because historically, society just lumps all of this together under the completely useless umbrella of feminine hygiene issues.
Which is scientifically absurd.
Right.
Because they are three completely different biological mechanisms requiring entirely different treatments.
So let's break them down. What's BV?
So BV, or bacterial vaginosis, is what we were just discussing with the garden analogy. It is not an outside invader. It is an internal ecological collapse.
The bouncers leave the club.
Exactly. The lactobacilli drop, the pH rises, and the naturally occurring anaerobic bacteria just overgrow.
Got it. And yeast.
A yeast infection is fungal. It is an overgrowth of candida, which is a fungus that naturally lives in the body anyway.
Okay.
But it thrives in different conditions than BV, often presenting with thick discharge and intense itching, but typically without a strong odor.
Okay, so then we have Trich, which is short for trichomoniasis. What is that?
Trichomoniasis is neither a bacterial imbalance nor a fungus. It is an infection caused by a microscopic single-celled parasite called Trichomonas vaginalis.
A parasite.
Yes, it is a sexually transmitted infection.
Wow. Okay, so a bacterial overgrowth, a fungal bloom, and a literal parasite.
Yeah.
Treating those three radically different organisms with the same vague feminine freshness approach is just a recipe for disaster.
It really is. And yet, because patients lack the vocabulary to differentiate their symptoms, and doctors, frankly, lack the time to investigate, misdiagnosis between those three is rampant.
Which is exactly why the platform's focus on granular differences is so vital.
Precisely.
And they don't just stop at separating the conditions. They dive headfirst into the symptoms with a level of bluntness that is actually jarring.
Oh, they do not hold back.
No. They have an entire odor guide. The title alone is wild. It's called Fishy versus Onion versus Ammonia Smell, what each one usually means.
It's so direct.
I read that and immediately thought about how deeply conditioned we are to use sanitizing language regarding the body. You know, we see commercials with blue liquid and whispers about intimate freshness.
Right, the blue liquid. Always the blue liquid.
Always. Does seeing the word ammonia plastered on a health guide initially shock people, you think?
I think it shatters the social conditioning, absolutely. But that shock is a necessary disruptive tool. Because when you use vague euphemisms, the implicit message is, this part of your biology is too shameful, too dirty to be named accurately.
Ah, so by refusing to name it, you just reinforce the taboo.
Exactly. But let's look at the biological mechanism behind those specific odors. Why does bacterial vaginosis smell like fish or ammonia?
Yeah, what is the science there?
Well, when the healthy acidic environment drops and those anaerobic bacteria take over, they start consuming proteins and shedding gaseous byproducts.
Okay.
And those byproducts are chemical compounds called amines.
Amines, like amino acids.
Related, yes.
Yeah.
And two of the specific amines produced by this bacterial overgrowth are literally named putrescine and cadaverine.
Wait, cadaverine as in cadaver?
Yes, they are the exact same chemical compounds responsible for the smell of decaying organic matter or old fish.
Oh my God. That is intense.
It is, and ammonia itself is another type of gas released during this bacterial metabolic process.
So it's not a hygiene issue at all. It's literally a chemical exhaust pipe from a bacterial block party.
That is the perfect way to put it, and that is the crucial pivot the platform is forcing.
It totally changed the narrative.
Let's look at what this quick difference guide achieves for a user psychologically. When a patient is experiencing symptoms they don't understand, the overwhelming emotion is anxiety.
Oh, for sure.
And anxiety thrives in ambiguity.
Because your mind immediately rushes to the worst-case scenario.
Yeah.
You assume you are broken or dirty or doing
what?
something wrong.
Exactly. And when a doctor broadly implies you have a hygiene issue, that functions as a character judgment disguised as a medical diagnosis.
Yes, it feels like an insult.
But when an educational platform hands you highly specific scientific benchmarks, like asking you to identify whether an odor is closer to an onion or to ammonia, it fundamentally rewires your relationship to your own biology.
You move from being a victim of your symptoms to being almost like a researcher in your own lab.
Yes, it strips away the emotional anxiety of the unknown. Ammonia is not an insult. Ammonia is a chemical compound indicating the presence of specific anaerobic bacteria. By categorizing smells with this level of objective, unashamed clarity, the platform empowers the user with actionable data. You aren't dirty. You are observing an amamine reaction.
That is such a profound shift in perspective, going from, what is wrong with me, to, the data indicates an Aman profile consistent with bacterial vaginosis.
It completely neutralizes the panic.
But achieving that requires a very specific philosophical approach to education, which the source material explicitly lays out for us too.
Right, the pedagogical strategy of the platform.
Yeah. The text has this fascinating mission statement. It reads, quote, "This isn't about scare tactics or miracle cures. It's education, plain and simple, with a little humor, a lot of science, and zero fluff."
I love that line.
And it also repeatedly emphasizes understanding your body without shame. Now, I have to challenge one part of this quote because when I first read it, it felt almost defensive.
Defensive how?
Well, why does a modern health website need to explicitly state they don't use scare tactics or miracle cures? Like, who is actually looking for a scare tactic?
That's a great point. But to understand why that disclaimer is necessary, you have to look at the environment these users are migrating from.
Okay.
When traditional medicine leaves a vacuum, when doctors dismiss chronic pain or recurring infections as normal or in your head, desperate patients don't just give up. They go searching.
Right. They go to the internet. And the internet is the absolute wild west of unregulated health advice.
It really is. And predatory pseudoscience rushes in to fill the void left by medical dismissal.
Always.
If you have a recurring microbiome issue that the establishment is ignoring, you are incredibly vulnerable. You end up deep in these obscure digital forums where people are pushing unregulated herbal detoxes, dangerous DIY douches, or telling you to insert raw garlic cloves to cure a bacterial imbalance.
Actual snake oil. They just exploit the patient's desperation.
Exactly. And these predatory sites rely on a two-step algorithm. First, they use scare tactics to heighten the patient's existing anxiety, basically convincing them their body is toxic.
Oh, that's so manipulative.
And second, they offer a proprietary miracle cure to exploit that newly inflated anxiety for profit.
Of course they do.
So, by explicitly disavowing both scare tactics and miracle cures on their homepage, BV Talks is drawing a hard, necessary boundary. They are signaling to a very weary audience, we know what you've been through online, and we are a safe harbor.
They're establishing trust by calling out the grift. I love that.
It's very smart.
And then they introduce their specific recipe for building that trust, which is a little humor, a lot of science, and zero fluff.
Yes.
I really want to dig into the humor aspect because in a medical context, especially one dealing with frustrating, physically uncomfortable symptoms, humor might seem a bit out of place.
It does seem odd at first glance.
Right. You don't generally want your doctor doing stand-up comedy while diagnosing you.
No, you definitely don't. It seems counterintuitive, much like the antibiotic paradox we discussed earlier. But in the context of health literacy, the intersection of humor and science is a highly deliberate neurological tool.
Neurological, how so?
Well, we have to look at how shame functions in the human brain.
Okay, shame triggers the fight or flight response, doesn't it?
Exactly. It triggers the sympathetic nervous system. Shame makes us tense. It makes us want to hide.
Yeah.
When you are deeply ashamed of a bodily function, your cognitive bandwidth literally narrows. You lose the ability to absorb, process, and retain complex new information because your brain is entirely focused on the perceived social threat.
Wow. So if a website is just cold, sterile medical jargon, the user stays locked in that tense defensive state.
Precisely. And humor is the natural biological antagonist to shame.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. When you laugh or even just encounter a wry knowing tone, which we see in their blog titles like, why odor changes after sex when it's not normal, your parasympathetic nervous system engages. The physical tension breaks.
You exhale.
Exactly. By combining a slightly humorous, deeply relatable tone with rigorous zero-fluff science, the platform chemically neutralizes the shame that usually blocks health literacy.
That is brilliant.
They aren't using humor to make light of the pain. They are using humor to create a psychological environment where the user actually feels safe enough to learn the science.
Let's bring this all back to you listening to this right now. We promised at the beginning that this was a masterclass in communication, and the blueprint is right here in the text.
It really is applicable to so many fields.
Yeah, whether you are dealing with a complex health issue, trying to explain a technical problem to a frustrated client, or managing any situation where confusion and shame intersect, the BB Talk strategy works.
Ditch the jargon.
Yep.
Banish the shame.
Explicitly acknowledge the user's frustration. Validate that they are right to be annoyed by the equivalent of the just flip the circuit breaker approach.
Right.
And then, most importantly, don't talk down to them. Give them precise, actionable knowledge. Teach them the difference between a fungus, a bacteria, and a parasite. Teach them what an amine is.
Because knowledge is only truly valuable when it can be understood and applied by the person who needs it most.
Absolutely.
What we are observing with this platform is really the democratization of diagnostic vocabulary.
And that democratization leads directly to the final thought I want to leave you with today. On the BB Talks site, there is a specific, interactive call to action.
Oh, the Start Here button.
Yes, a button that simply says, Start Here, pick what's going on. It allows the user to click through their symptoms and essentially lead their own diagnostic journey before they ever speak to a professional.
It puts the patient squarely in the driver's seat of their own biology.
Exactly. Think back to our opening scenario today, that incredibly infuriating feeling of being rushed, sitting on crinkly paper in an exam room, hoping the person with the medical degree will figure out why the power keeps going out in your house.
Yeah.
That scenario relies on a very specific traditional hierarchy where the doctor holds all the linguistic and scientific power, and the patient just passively receives the treatment.
The patient is basically just a passenger.
Right. But imagine what happens when educational platforms arm patients with zero-fluff science and absolute linguistic precision before they even step foot inside a clinic.
It changes everything.
Imagine the shift in the room when a patient doesn't just say, oh, something's wrong down there, but instead looks the doctor in the eye and says, I am tracking an ammonia odor and a rising pH level that indicates a bacterial imbalance, and I want to discuss underlying microbiome health, not just a broad-spectrum antibiotic.
You completely dismantle the traditional power dynamic.
You do, so I want you to mull this over. When patients possess the exact vocabulary to articulate the granular science of their own bodies, does the medical establishment still have the power to just flip the circuit breaker and walk away? Or do they finally have to stop, pull up a chair, and actually fix the wiring?
It is a question that challenges the entire future of patient advocacy, honestly.
It really does. We'll leave you to think on that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.